So today I want to talk to you about video games and archaeology. And I know these sound like two very different fields, but there is an entire field of archaeology and education in general, which revolves around what's called serious games. And serious games are basically video game software that has been repurposed to answer research questions. And the purpose is educational. So today we're going to be looking at why visualization is important, first of all, and then we'll be looking specifically at why serious games are important. Now, visualization is quite a new field in archaeology. It's been around for about 30 years, and I'm sure all of you have heard it being mentioned many times, and some of you may know exactly what it is, and some of you may have no idea. But the basic idea behind it is that in archaeology, like in all fields, you have a lot of data, and you have to present this data in some way, both to the public or to other researchers. So in order to present data, we use some form of visual abstraction quite often, and this can be graphs, but in case of visualization, it's more graphical imagery. But I want to give you a bit of an example of why visualizing data is important. So if you look here, this is a piece of text I'd like you to go through very quickly. As you can see, it's not archaeological in theme. You've probably got a bit of a gist of it. Now, if you're reading that, you're probably a bit confused on what to do. This is, imagine you're making an IKEA bedside table. That's the instructions. Now imagine doing the same, but with that. It's an image, and both of them together, but even that just alone gives you a better understanding than the text ever will. And this is why visualization is important. So in archaeology, visualization has lots of different shapes and forms. The ones we're going to be talking about mainly today are this kind of visualization, which is a bit more graphical. On the top here, we've got some examples of 3D reconstruction. The bottom here is photogrammetry. Today we'll be mainly talking about 3D reconstructions, this kind of stuff, associated with gaming software. And the questions I'll be answering today are, how can serious games help us present archaeological data, mainly to the general public? How can serious games help us interpret archaeological data? And we're looking at some examples from Malta of how we've analysed sites using gaming software. And then why should we use serious games rather than other types of software or other methods? So I'm going to be looking at Malta specifically. That's my area of research. That's a Google Earth image of Malta. Now, Malta is characterised by lots of megalithic sites, all from the Neolithic, dating around 3600 to 700 BC. You have mainly two types of structure in Malta. You have temple complexes, which are above ground and were used for different kinds of rituals. And then you've got the hypogea, which are underground cave systems, which were used to bury the dead. And there's a few examples of names that are sites down here. But important elements in Maltese ritual are the binary between light and dark. So people used to manipulate lighting in order to create some special effects that would be used in their belief system. And we're looking at some examples of that later on. And that light and dark binary fits into the whole death and life binary as well. Hence the temples, which was the area of the living, and the hypogea, which was the part of the dead. So the two sites we'll be looking at specifically today are the site of Gigantea, which is a temple complex. It's characterized by two temples, one here, one here. This one is older, this one's a bit newer. And that's a 3D model of it. So this is definitely a temple system, and you can see one of the main features of this temple system, which is seen throughout the Maltese landscape, is you've got this central corridor with apses either side and an apsis at the end, and that's quite a typical formation in Maltese temples. The other side we'll be looking at is these hypogea. This is the Brockdorf Circle, or the Zagreb Brockdorf Circle. It was a cave system originally, but the roofs collapsed, so it looks a bit more open plan at the moment. But there's lots of interesting screens and walls and lots of interesting division within it. I'll be looking at what that means and what we can find out using 3D software. So the first question that I promised to answer was, how can you use serious games to present archaeological data? Once again, this is mainly for the general public, but there's a lot of stuff you can do also for researchers. But in this particular instance, we're looking for a wider public. So the first reason why should we use this kind of information, first of all, sites aren't always accessible to the public. For example, this is the Zagreb Brockdorf Circle. As you can see now, it's completely overrun with plants. There's a massive gate somewhere down here, so you can't go in at all. So the public cannot visit this site as it currently stands. But also, what is now present on site is very different from what was there at one point. So this is a photo from the Zagreb Circle. This is somebody excavating a massive bowl. And this is how it looks today. It's in the sunshine, it's very beautiful. But that's what it will probably look like in the past. It's much darker. So the conditions have changed so much, so even showing what is there currently would be a misrepresentation of the past, and this sort of helps us give a better understanding of how the past would have looked like. The other important thing about presenting through serious games is interactive learning. Now this is the crucial part, because if we take instructions from video games and apply it to 3D modelling, you can get stuff like this, which is a character which can explore freely this ancient world. So by using gaming software, you can actually allow people to explore at their own leisure archaeological sites. And there's been a lot of research done showing that if you let people explore themselves and these people feel present within this virtual environment, this leads to a much higher knowledge retention. For interactivity, people just gain a deeper understanding of how things relate to each other. So it's a great way to present archaeological data. So this is an example of the Zagreb Circle. This is one I made. So I got a gaming engine called Unity 3D. I got the model, put it in, made a little character so you can walk around, added a bit of tool so you got like a bit of light, and this is showing how people can interact with the site. It's a new way of interacting. And there's a few things which are very interesting. For example, in the area they're currently in, you have to crouch to get into this area, so you have to physically press a button, and that's making people aware that the roof would have been quite low. You also have panels that give you more information, photographs which give you information about the site. In a second it's going to walk up and you can manipulate the position of the sun. And this is just giving a better understanding of how the site used to be. And again, people can use this to just explore the site themselves, and that's very important for presentation. So that's how we can use serious games for presentation, by importing 3D reconstructions into gaming software. But we're also going to look at how serious games can help interpret archaeological site, and this is more important for the research side of this project. So serious games can help interpret archaeological sites in many different ways. I think first of all, an important element is, once again, we're showing what the site was in the past rather than what it is in the present, and this is very important because sites have changed so much that if you simulate how they look now, those results may not be the same as they were in the past. And by by recreating the past scenario, this sort of helps us get a better understanding of the past. But the other thing that I found using this kind of software is that gaming software specifically is particularly tailored for custom making tools. So if you've got a specific question that you want to answer, you can use gaming software to simulate the past environment, and you can use it to create a specific tool by scripting, by coding, or by using the in-game physics to answer those questions. So it's a very flexible tool that you can just adapt to the given scenario. And I've got a few examples from Malta again. So this is the Temple of Gigantia, or the Temples of Gigantia. So something I was looking at was the lighting in this temple, and specifically the orientation of the temple, because throughout the entire Maltese landscape there's suggestions that there's all kinds of solar alignments and lunar alignments and sidereal alignments, and in Gigantia there was a suggestion that there was a winter solstice alignment. So I wrote a script that calculated the position of the sun throughout the year, and it would then send a ray from the sun, which is somewhere down here, all the way to that point in the center of the temple. And if this line hits any surfaces like a wall, then there isn't an alignment because the rays of the sun can't reach the end of that temple. But if this line goes straight down here all the way to the back, then obviously there is definitely an alignment with the ray. And I run this software for every minute of a year, and this is the results I got. I said there's two temples in Gigantia, so that's why we got Gigantia 1 and Gigantia 2. But both of them seem to have very consistent data. Around the middle of November, you get this sun hitting the back of the temple for around 30 minutes in Gigantia 1 and 45 minutes in Gigantia 2. And this continues all the way down to about the middle of January. And more importantly, that line there in the middle shows that the peak of this ray hitting the back is on the winter solstice, which obviously seems to confirm this winter alignment. But it also gives us more important data, because while this had been noted physically on site before, this data actually tells us that this happens the full month before and the full month after as well, which hadn't been picked up before because people didn't think or look for that. But the software very quickly managed to calculate all these positions, and it gives us a better understanding of how the Mounties created the temples and what orientation they put it on. Another piece of software that I wrote has to do with visibility on the sites. So in the Zagabofto circle, as you can see, the site's quite big, and it's got all kinds of screens and walls and caves and niches. And the way people manipulated this space is very interesting, because they seem to be blocking out the view of certain areas or blocking light from moving around in certain areas. So I wrote a script which calculated, made this into a grid of points, and then would send a ray again from each point to every other point in this grid. And that will give you an intensity value, which is how visible that point is in the entire structure. And this is what you get at the end, this visibility map, which is basically a viewshed. And this area here is the most visible. And that's very interesting, because that's originally called the display area. And this title was maybe a bit hastily put in the original publication, but it definitely shows that if they were trying to display stuff, that would be the perfect place for it to be. And they've got, there's a lot of skeletons here, so it does seem like it would be an interesting point. And that's interesting that the software tells us this. The other thing that's very interesting is that there seems to be a corridor going down here. You can sort of make it out, or visibility. And this seems to fit in with the Mounties temples. So there seems to be some similarities between the temples and the Hypogea, because here you've got this central corridor with apses either side and at the end, and here you've got this central corridor here with apses either sides. And more interestingly, it's how they manipulate this space tells us a lot about maybe how our ancient rituals were like. For example, here, this is 2 visibility maps. The only difference between the two is that we've put a megalith here. This was done with Rowan and Owen, actually, who's up there as well. So we've added a screen here, and because there's evidence that a screen was originally there but has been robbed out or moved, but it's not there anymore. But placing that screen there completely changes the visibility in this entire cave. You can see that it's much darker than this one here. And this is once again reminiscent of the temples, where they're suggesting that these doorways would have been blocked up at certain points with megaliths. So all this evidence seems to suggest that there are similarities between the temples and the Hypogea, something which was suggested before, but this seems to be a bit more concrete evidence. So I'm drawing towards a conclusion. Why should we look at serious games rather than other methods? So obviously I've shown you some examples of what can be done, but at the same time it's not all that can be done with this software. So the main advantages I find with using gaming software and serious games is that, first of all, as I was mentioning before, you can analyse sites as they were rather than as they are now, and this gives us a better understanding of the past. Also, simulations are replicable, so you can retest them and retry them, and you can very simply adapt it and change it slightly to test out different scenarios, something that you can't do in real life or just by calculations. But more importantly, I think the main point is the customizable tools and adaptable tools. If you've got a question, you can use this software to try and answer this question, and if you've then written a piece of code to analyze a question, you can then reuse that for a different site with very simple adaptations. So while a lot of other tools are quite limited in their choices, this provides you with a lot more flexibility that is very important for research. People to thank, lots of different people. Also, I've got more information on my blog as well. I've nearly got 40,000 people seeing it, so like if you go and look at it, you'll make me very happy. But that's pretty much what I've got to say. So, questions? Quick questions?
I have a question, right?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I thought that was fascinating.
Cool.
What's the serious games? What's the opposite of serious games? And what's the definition between the two? Do you know, like, say you know, they're okay. That's the question.
Well, serious games. The main thing with serious games is that they are educational. So it's usually opposed to just video games, which can have some educational elements, but isn't the main focus. Serious game, the main focus is educational. I stretch it a bit more, I'd say, because I sort of use it for analysis as well, and that may be a bit more of a different realm. But as far as I can tell, there isn't a good terminology for it yet. So I think it still fits within the serious game realms. But yeah, it's anything which the main focus is educational, but still using video games, essentially. Yes?
Do you recommend to use this technology to reconstruct entire landscapes?
You can use this kind of stuff to reconstruct entire landscapes. I think it really depends on what your focus is. Something that I didn't have enough time to touch upon is on why you should use it, and it should never be just because it's there. You have to, if you've got a specific question that you want to answer, then that's a good way to approach it. But if you're trying to just like, you can't just take the software and go, I'm going to just run whatever and see what it does. If you've got a question, then this may be the best tool, but there may be other tools as well that, I don't know.
Would be more in the context of illustration, displaying in a museum context?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you want to do again, like, because the main focus of this for presentation is interactivity of it. You, as you can see, you can walk around the site, but you can interact with it as well. You could do like animations to show how the landscape has changed, for example. It gives you a lot of tools for that. But if you're just presenting as a 2D image, for example, other tools will be more suited for that, because you don't need all this fancy stuff to do it. It again depends on the purpose you're going for.
I was thinking of actually kind of displaying archaeological sites in a reconstructed landscape in a museum context. People can go play around with it, fly over from side to side, display information. Would that be a suitable tool as well?
Oh yeah, that should be quite easy. I'm assuming this is this GIS data you've got as a terrain map.
I'm actually doing 3D photogrammetry survey.
Oh, photogrammetry. Yeah, no, it should still work. You just need to import the data, and then like Unity comes with its own asset tool. So literally, all you have to do is click a few buttons, and it will drop a little figure, and you can walk around with it.
Could you integrate it with the GIS?
I think so. Yeah, it does work surprisingly with a lot of different types of data, and to be honest, like I use Unity 3D because I find it very useful. But there's lots of other ones as well. So it's not like there is a variety of tools that you could be using, a variety of software. So if one doesn't do it, something else will probably do it. The thing I find is one of the reasons I got into it was that when I started making 3D reconstructions and trying to show people these 3D reconstructions, a lot of time you just, you click the mouse and it sort of rotates it from the center, and it's not the most intuitive view. You don't really get much out of it. But this kind of software, you can actually walk around it, you can see stuff. And a lot of time I will do a reconstruction, I'll walk around it a bit, and then I'll start going, well, that doesn't make any sense, that doesn't make any sense at all. I was doing a reconstruction of an Etruscan house just the other day, and there was a little terraced area which was just above everything else. And it looked perfectly fine in a 3D model, but once you drag the person in and he was walking around this terraced area, you notice that he can't see anything above a wall, essentially. So that seemed to suggest that the wall may have been, like this terrace may be a bit higher than what we had, or the wall may be a bit shorter, or that you couldn't see, and that's got other implications as well. So it gives you a new perspective, in a way a bit more realistic perspective, because you're actually the first person exploring it. So it's got like interesting applications in that sense.
Do you think it can be converted into a virtual reality game?
Yeah. So with headset, you mean? Yeah. I was actually working on the one I showed, the little video I showed you, me and my friend were working on getting it onto a phone. Yeah, it's like an Android VR set. So it's actually surprisingly easy to do. You only need to change like a few input things, and it's really, really easy. The only problem we were having is that we were using a phone, so the processing power wasn't good enough. So it was very, very jittery. But given the right hardware, you could easily implement it. Yes?
I was wondering, in your opinion, what would be the dangers of using these kind of techniques in interpreting sites?
Okay, I actually prepared a slide on that. The biggest problem is, yeah, so one of the biggest problems, like there's lots of problems, obviously, no technology is perfect. I think one of the biggest problems with any kind of 3D reconstruction is the inaccuracy and the hypothetical reconstruction. When you're building any kind of reconstruction model, you're going to be working with limited data because the site isn't there anymore. Like, you know, we've all been on, most of us have been on an archaeological site. You've seen how, you know, it's all, you know, you've got that much foundation and there's so much more house on top or so much more temple on top, which isn't there anymore. So it's a very big problem, this, of course. But there is ways to counter that. So first of all, when it comes to presentation, a lot of it is done through this kind of stuff. So this is another piece of software I wrote where you can see it as wireframes. So these are the elements which aren't there anymore. And this gives you a visual representation of what you've added in, what interpretation you've added in. But more importantly, I think that, especially for research purpose, interpretation purposes, metadata and paradata are crucial. It's something which is a big problem in virtual reality and 3D modeling at the moment. It's not implemented a lot, but it really, really should be. You should, every time you make a 3D model or a video game or any kind of interpretive tool, you should always write what you've done, why you've done it that way, what's the thought process that brought you up to that point. And if you've got all that data and that data is accessible to everyone else, then other people can look at it and go, okay, then there's a bit of a, you know, this is fine, this may be a bit more shaky, and it gives you a better understanding. Because it is speculative, regardless of what you do, it's going to be speculative. But if you do enough research and you write it all up properly, you've got enough information to be able to draw at least some good conclusions. Yeah.
I'll go for questions. So you had your Viewsheds
yes.
back there, and I was just wondering, what points are you actually taking that view from? Where is that visibility emanating from?
So what I did for this was, so we got that model, this model here, essentially, and I put a plane cutting through pretty much the base.
Okay.
And then I calculated, so there was a plane for the base and there was a plane about eye height on top of it. So I was factoring the fact that you wouldn't be looking like on the floor, you'd be looking from higher up, lower down. So it then calculates, this is basically loads of points all the way across at a distance of I think 5 centimetres, maybe 2 centimetres. I can't remember, I can't remember, it's a while ago I was doing it. And then, yeah, no one's calculating the distance, how many points it can hit.
A regular grid that you've done?
Yeah, it's a regular grid. Yeah. It's a regular grid throughout the entire site. Yeah. I think that's it. Yeah.
That's one question.
Yeah, of course.
There's actually a couple of things. This thing that struck me there.
Yeah.
In international heritage legislation, there's
Yeah.
a word which is impossible to pronounce and I can't even remember it. But it's about during reconstruction, you either should use the original material or you should make it very obvious that it has been, it is a reconstruction. So
Yeah.
The obvious thing would be when rebuilding part of a temple, rather than replacing the missing bit with white marble, you replace it with red plastic.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
There's
becomes
pink
a-
cement. Like pink cement.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It strikes me as compounded there as well.
Yeah.
One of the other things that interests me is I remember with the early visibility analysis
Yeah.
stuff, there's a lot of criticisms about primacy of vision as a sense. You know, vision
Yeah.
being only one of quite a large number of senses which
Yes.
we have. And visualization is obviously probably guilty of, could be targeted as being guilty of the same thing, but it was striking with the VR aspect of it
Yeah.
that, you know, if you have a headset and you have sound, and you have all sorts of things. Just that video of you going down into the hypogeum could potentially be very emotive.
Oh yeah, no, I've so one thing that doesn't come across the video because it didn't have the audio, but I've actually put like footsteps and jumping sounds, so when you're walking around it does give you the impression that it gives you a bit of sound response. But there is an entire field of visualization in regards to presence, like people being present within 3D models, and it is really interesting because you can get like all kinds of response. It's a whole thing of when you put a VR set on your head, a lot of people feel nauseous when doing it, and that's because you feel like you're part of it. Well, one of the theories is that you feel part of it. And it's that heightened response that actually gives you much more attention, and you get so much more out of it, and that's a very interesting point to do with presentation. In fact, like you sort of touched upon one of the big binary problems that there is in visualization at the moment. There is an entire school of thought which is we should do this as realistic as possible. They should be as beautiful as possible. They should be as, you should be walking into it and imagining you're exactly there. And there's a whole other school which thinks that instead you should use pink cement and you should try and show the inaccuracies and show that this is just a reconstruction, it's not the real thing. And I mean, it's still very much debated what should be the correct thing to do. Personally, I think it's a bit in between the two, which is why even like this doesn't look as finely polished as it could be, because I didn't want it to, make it look like it was as the site is, because as we've seen, the site is vastly different at the moment.
Do you know something, Rob, that every archaeologist struggles with interpretation, struggles with making explicit the dividing line between what is fact and what is interpretation.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that this sort of work is the ideal venue to allow that debate to be played out. It's implicit in so much archaeological research, but here you're confronting square this critical issue.
Yeah, the thing is that visualization is a fairly new technology. It's been around for 30 years, but it's not quite been accepted as yet. But if you start really thinking about how the rest of archaeology is done, you start realizing that stuff that you think is, the law and objective and perfectly right and that's the way it should be, you start questioning and start thinking, actually, what are we doing? Are we doing the things correctly or not? And this, because it's so new, this is sort of put even more under scrutiny, obviously. But there are other problems throughout the entire archaeological record. So one of the things you get is that, like, a lot of people will say this is subjective. I've made this model. If somebody made a different model, it would be different, and I put my own, artistic license into this. But then I was reading an article quite recently where they were saying that photography isn't as objective as you want to think, because when you take a photograph, you're putting a specific setting, you're taking a specific angle, you're taking a specific thing. So although we look at, if you've got a photograph of a site, people look and go, yeah, that's how it was, that's 100%. Actually, it's not as clear cut as you'd want to think, and you've got this in 3D modelling, definitely, and it sort of makes you think of like the wider picture, definitely. But
we're also dealing with the real world. Putting things in Cartesian space is a very important thing, and you realise that the real laws of physics are a constraining factor, which is something archaeologists prefer to live in, this sort of mad, non-Euclidean universe where everything doesn't necessarily have to fit.
Yeah.
But this is the sort of work that allows you to do that. You're an embodied person when you go down that hole. You will literally bump your virtual head against things. And you have to crawl through certain other zones. I mean, it's great. You're making our project look way cooler than it is as well. So it's just a unilateral congratulation over you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think what you need next time you show this is to have a mallet.
Yeah.
And when somebody goes down the steps, they hit them in the head. That full experiential thing.
You can do but this is the thing of gaming software. Like 3D modeling itself is very useful, but it's limited with what you can do. Like you can make a model and that's it. But this kind of stuff, you can do all kinds of things. Like if you double in animation, you could do that very easily. We were talking about it actually, about doing acoustics, like running the acoustics of a site, for example, and that's all kind of stuff that it's there, like the potential is there, you just need to think of a way to do it. The tool, that's the beauty of it, it's so flexible that you can just adapt it. And this comes with stuff like, this comes with physics inbuilt. So if you wanted to test the structural integrity of a site, it's very easy to do. So there's so much potential, and it's just a question of thinking, okay, what do I want to do? How do I do it? And that's all it is.
And also, you can do it every time you want to.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's kind of the
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
it's like you don't actually have to slap any cement on anything. If you want to see what this
Yeah,
is like
yeah,
2 meters
yeah.
taller, just do it.
Yeah, but it's also like for example, like this one here. This one here, like yeah, that one. So putting that megalith there and switching on from there, like me and Rowan and Owen did it in few hours. Like it wasn't even that. It took so little to change the entire structure by just adding that thing there, and it gave you interesting results. So it's very flexible. I think that's the main thing from it. Like it's so flexible, and you can just do whatever you want. Yeah, cool.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Everyone join me in another round of applause there.
Thank you.